The Shepherd, the Sword, and the Silence of God. The Untold Story of Saul, David, and a Kingdom Divided. Chapter 1. Hannah's Prayer and the Child Who Listened to God. In a quiet village nestled in the heart of Israel, there lived a woman named Hannah. She was the first wife of a kind man named Elkanah. Elkanah loved Hannah deeply, more than anyone else in the world. But there was one thing missing from her life, something that tore at her soul every day. She could not have children. In those times, a woman's ability to bear children was seen as a divine blessing. Hannah's empty arms weren't just a source of personal sorrow, they were seen by many as a sign that God had turned his face from her. To make matters worse, Elkanah had a second wife named Peninnah. Peninnah had several children and never missed a chance to remind Hannah of what she lacked. Her words were sharp, her looks contemptuous, and her laughter cruel. Every year, Elkanah's household would journey to the temple of the Lord at Shiloh to offer sacrifices. One particular year, the sting of Peninnah's mocking words cut deeper than usual. Hannah cried so much she couldn't eat. Her husband, seeing her anguish, said gently, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" But Hannah couldn't be comforted. That evening, she slipped away from the feast and went into the temple alone. Her heart was raw. Her hands trembled. She fell to her knees and prayed, not with loud shouts or grand displays, but with a whisper only heaven could hear. "Lord Almighty," she prayed, "if you will look on your servant's misery and give me a son, I will give him back to you for all the days of his life. No razor shall ever touch his head." As she wept and prayed, her lips moved, but no sound came out. Nearby sat Eli, the priest. Seeing her mouth move without hearing a word, he misunderstood and approached her with suspicion. "How long will you stay drunk?" he asked harshly. "Put away your wine." Hannah's eyes widened, and through her tears she explained, "No, my lord, I'm not drunk. I have not had any wine or beer. I'm a woman deeply troubled. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord." Eli's tone softened. He recognized her sincerity. "Go in peace," he said, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Something changed in Hannah that day. Her spirit was lifted, her appetite returned, and for the first time in a long while, hope sparkled in her eyes. Not long after, God answered her prayer. She gave birth to a son and named him Samuel, which means God has heard. When Samuel was still very young, Hannah kept her promise. She brought the boy to Eli at the temple, carrying offerings and a heart full of devotion. She said to him, "I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be given over to the service of God." Though it was no small thing to leave her only child behind, Hannah didn't leave in sorrow. She trusted that God's presence would raise her son better than any human hand. Each year, she would come back to visit him and bring a little robe she had made with her own hands. Samuel grew under Eli's care, learning the ways of the Lord and serving in the temple. One night, as the boy was lying in bed near the Ark of the Covenant, he heard a voice calling, "Samuel." He jumped up and ran to Eli. "Here I am. You called me," Eli, groggy, replied. "I didn't call you. Go back to bed." But the voice came again, "Samuel," and again. After the third time, Eli began to understand it was the Lord who was calling the boy. He told Samuel, "Next time you hear the voice, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So the fourth time the voice called, Samuel responded as instructed, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." God spoke to Samuel that night not just about Eli's household, but about the future of Israel. Though young, Samuel listened, and the next morning, with fear and trembling, he told Eli everything. Eli received the message with resignation, saying, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." From that day on, Samuel grew not only in stature but in favor with the Lord. And soon, all of Israel would know that God had chosen this boy to be his prophet. Chapter 2. The Ark of God and the Fall of Eli's House. The years passed, and Samuel's name grew across the land. The boy who once whispered to God in the night now spoke boldly as the Lord's prophet. The people respected him. His words carried weight, and his voice echoed truth. But Israel, as a nation, still wrestled with disobedience and fear. Their enemies, the Philistines, had grown bolder and more powerful. Armed and brutal, they threatened the peace of Israel once again. The people, feeling vulnerable, turned to what they thought was their ultimate weapon, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was more than a sacred relic. It represented the presence of the Almighty. It had led the Israelites through the wilderness, crossed the Jordan River, and brought down the walls of Jericho. Surely, they thought, if we bring the Ark into battle, we cannot lose. So the elders of Israel sent for the Ark from Shiloh. Along with it came Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, the high priest. But these were not men of righteousness. Though they served in the temple, their hearts were corrupt, greedy, arrogant, and irreverent. Still, they carried the Ark into the battlefield at Ebenezer. When the Ark entered the Israelite camp, the people erupted in cheers so loud the earth seemed to shake. "Now the Lord will fight for us," they shouted. Across the valley, the Philistines heard the thunderous roar and trembled. "The gods have come into their camp," they cried. "This is the God who struck Egypt with plagues. We are doomed." But their commanders were quick to rally them. "Be strong, fight like warriors, or you'll become slaves to the Hebrews." Battle commenced, but the outcome was not what Israel had expected. The Philistines surged forward with fierce power, and Israel was overwhelmed. Thousands fell. The army broke and fled in chaos. Even worse, Hophni and Phinehas were slain and the Ark of God was captured. When the news reached Shiloh, a messenger arrived running, clothes torn and dust covering his head. Eli, now old and blind, was waiting by the gate. His heart trembled not just for the army, not just for his sons, but for the Ark. "What happened?" he asked. The messenger replied, "Breathless, Israel has fled before the Philistines. Your sons are dead, and the Ark of God has been captured." At that moment, Eli fell backward off his chair. His neck snapped, and he died instantly. He had judged Israel for 40 years, but the tragedy didn't end there. Phinehas's wife, who was pregnant and near her time, heard the dreadful news: her husband dead, her father-in-law gone, and the Ark taken. The sorrow struck her like a blow. She went into premature labor and bore a son. As her strength faded and her life slipped away, she named the boy Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed from Israel. Her final words were a whisper of grief: the glory is gone, for the Ark of God has been taken. Meanwhile, the Philistines carried the Ark to the city of Ashdod and placed it in the temple of their god, Dagon. They saw it not as a holy object, but as a trophy of war, proof that their God had triumphed over the God of Israel. But the Lord would not be mocked. The next morning, the priests of Dagon entered the temple and froze in place. There lay their idol face down before the Ark of the Lord. Startled, they set Dagon upright again. But the following morning, they returned to an even more disturbing sight. This time, Dagon had not only fallen, but his head and hands were broken off, lying in the doorway. Only the stump of the idol remained. Fear spread quickly. Then came the sickness. People throughout Ashdod were struck with tumors. A deadly panic gripped the city. "We can't keep the Ark here," they cried. "It's destroying us." So they sent it to Gath. But the same horrors followed: disease, death, terror. Then it was sent to Ekron, and the people there wailed, "They're sending us the Ark to kill us all." After 7 months of devastation, the Philistines had had enough. Their leaders gathered and asked the priests and diviners, "What should we do with this Ark?" The priests advised, "Send it back with a guilt offering, gold models of the tumors and rats that afflicted you. Show honor to the God of Israel." So they built a new cart, placed the Ark on it with the offerings, and hitched it to 2 cows that had never been yoked. They watched as the cows, without hesitation, walked straight toward the town of Bethshemesh in Israel, lowing as they went. The Philistine rulers followed at a distance, watching in awe. When the people of Bethshemesh saw the Ark approaching, they rejoiced. They took the cart apart and offered the cows as a sacrifice to the Lord. But in their excitement, some of the people looked inside the Ark, something strictly forbidden. Their curiosity became their undoing. God struck down 70 of them that day, reminding the people that His holiness must be respected. Fearing further judgment, the people of Bethshemesh sent the Ark to the town of Kiriath-Jearim, where it remained for years. There it was kept in the house of Abinadab, and his son Eleazar was consecrated to guard it. Though the Ark had returned, the people of Israel were still far from God. They mourned. Their hearts felt the emptiness. They began to understand it wasn't the ark that gave victory. It was their obedience, their trust, their walk with God. And Samuel, now fully grown and recognized as a prophet throughout the land, stood ready to call Israel back to the God they had abandoned, ready to lead them into a future shaped not by relics or rituals, but by faith. The glory had left, but it was not lost forever. A new chapter was about to begin. Chapter 3. Israel returns to God and Saul is chosen as king. Years passed since the ark had returned to Israel, resting in Kiriath-Jearim. But though the sacred chest was back, the people still felt far from the God who had once thundered on Mount Sinai and led them through the desert. Their hearts ached with the weight of their own disobedience. The joy of the past had faded into a bitter longing. Samuel, now a man, saw the sorrow across the land. He had watched his people drift from the Lord, chasing foreign gods, leaning on idols carved by hands instead of faith born in the heart. But he did not give up on them. One day, he stood before the people and spoke with fire in his voice. If you truly want to return to the Lord, get rid of your foreign gods. Remove your Ashtoreths. Devote yourselves to the Lord and serve him only. Then he will deliver you from the Philistines. Something stirred in the hearts of the Israelites. Perhaps it was the pain of defeat, the shame of failure, or the memory of miracles long past. Whatever it was, it led them to repentance. They destroyed their idols. They gathered at a place called Mizpah to fast, pray, and confess their sins. Samuel led them in sacrifice, offering a lamb to the Lord. As the smoke rose into the sky, the people lifted their cries to heaven. But danger was near. The Philistines heard about the gathering at Mizpah. To them, it looked like a rebellion, a perfect chance to strike. Their warriors mobilized quickly, moving to crush Israel's hopes once and for all. When the Israelites saw the Philistine army approaching, fear swept through them like a plague. Don't stop praying, they begged Samuel. Cry out to the Lord for us. Ask him to rescue us. Samuel stood between the people and the enemy, between fear and faith, and he lifted his voice to heaven. As he cried out, a storm began to form. Thunder cracked the sky with a fury so great it shook the ground. The Philistines, confused and terrified by the sound, broke formation. Panic consumed them. The Israelites, emboldened, surged forward and chased the invaders from the battlefield. It wasn't a battle they had won on their own. It was the Lord's victory. Samuel set a stone on the battlefield and named it Ebenezer, meaning stone of help. The Lord has helped us this far, he declared. And for many years after, the Philistines stayed away. The land knew peace under Samuel's leadership. He judged with fairness, traveled the land, and pointed the people back to their God. But as Samuel grew old, concern began to spread. What happens when he's gone? People whispered, who will lead us then? Samuel had appointed his sons, Joel and Abijah, as judges in Beersheba, but they were not like their father. They were corrupt. They took bribes, twisted justice, and the people noticed. One day, the elders of Israel gathered and came to Samuel at Ramah. Their message was clear and heavy. You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Appoint for us a king, just like all the other nations have. Samuel's heart broke. He had given his life to serving these people, guiding them under the Lord's rule. Now they were asking to trade divine leadership for a crown and scepter. He prayed in anguish, and the Lord responded not with rejection, but with truth. Listen to the people. It is not you they have rejected, but me as their king. Do what they ask, but warn them clearly about what a king will do. So Samuel called the people together and spoke with the weight of heaven in his voice. If you choose to have a king, know this. He will take your sons and draft them into his army. He'll assign them to plow his fields, harvest his crops, forge his weapons. Your daughters will cook, bake, and serve in his palace. He will take your best vineyards, your olive groves, your fields. You'll cry out one day because of the king you chose, but the Lord will not answer you then. But the people would not be swayed. No, they insisted. We want a king. We want to be like the other nations. We want someone to lead us into battle. Samuel, grieved but obedient, relayed their decision to God. And the Lord said, give them what they've asked for. Far away, In a small town in the tribe of Benjamin, a tall, handsome young man was out searching for his father's lost donkeys. His name was Saul, son of Kish. He stood taller than anyone else in Israel. He was strong, quiet, and unaware that destiny was walking with him. After days of searching with no success, Saul's servant suggested, "Let's go ask the man of God in this town. He may be able to tell us where the donkeys are." That man of God was Samuel. The Lord had already spoken to Samuel that morning, "Tomorrow, I will send you a man from Benjamin. Anoint him as ruler over my people." So when Samuel laid eyes on Saul, the Lord confirmed, "This is the one." Samuel invited Saul to a feast, sat him at the head of the table, and the next morning, as they walked away from the city, he took a flask of oil and poured it over Saul's head. "The Lord has anointed you as ruler over his inheritance," Samuel said. "You will rescue his people from the Philistines." Saul was stunned. "But I'm from the smallest tribe in Israel. My family is the least among them." But God had spoken. Saul was chosen. Later, Samuel gathered all the tribes at Mizpah to announce the new king. The tribe of Benjamin was selected, then the clan of Matri, and finally Saul's name was called. But when they looked around, he was nowhere to be found. He was hiding among the supplies, overwhelmed by fear. When they brought him forward, he stood a full head taller than anyone else. Samuel said to the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There's no one like him among all the people." The crowd shouted, "Long live the king!" And so Israel had its first monarch, a king tall in stature, humble in spirit for now. The people rejoiced, but deep in Samuel's heart, a warning still echoed. The people had chosen a crown over the presence of God. Only time would reveal the weight of that decision. Chapter 4: Saul's rise, Jonathan's courage, and the cost of disobedience. At first, King Saul ruled with humility. He was no tyrant. He didn't seek glory or riches. In fact, he returned to his farm after the announcement of his kingship, plowing fields as if nothing had changed. But God had chosen him, and when the time came to rise, Saul answered. Trouble wasn't far behind. The Ammonites, fierce enemies from the east, laid siege to the Israelite town of Jabesh Gilead. Their leader, Nahash, gave a cruel demand to the townspeople. "Give me your right eyes, every single one of you. Then I let you live." It wasn't a bluff. The elders begged for time. "Give us 7 days to find help. If no one rescues us, we'll surrender." Confident and mocking, Nahash agreed. When news reached Saul, something ignited inside him. The Spirit of God rushed upon him, and Saul burned with righteous anger. He took a yoke of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent them across Israel with this message: "This is what will happen to the oxen of anyone who doesn't follow Saul and Samuel into battle." Fear of the Lord fell on the people. An army of 330,000 men gathered. Saul split them into companies and, under cover of darkness, launched a surprise attack on the Ammonites at dawn. It was a rout. Israel crushed their enemies and freed Jabesh Gilead. The people, filled with joy, turned to Saul and said, "Let us now kill those who doubted you should be king." But Saul refused. "No one will die today. The Lord has rescued Israel." That moment sealed Saul's place in the hearts of the people. They gathered at Gilgal, crowned him formally, and celebrated with sacrifices and singing. Saul had arrived, but the prophet Samuel wasn't done. He stood before the nation and delivered a final message as their judge. He asked them to testify. Had he ever cheated them, taken bribes, or abused his power? The people answered with one voice, "No." Then Samuel looked at them and said, "You asked for a king, and God has given you one. But do not think this relieves you of your duty to him. If you and your king follow the Lord, all will be well. But if you turn from him, his hand will be against you." To prove his point, Samuel called on the Lord to send thunder and rain, even though it was the dry season. Instantly, the skies darkened and thunder cracked above them. The people trembled. "Pray for us," they cried. "We've sinned by asking for a king." Samuel comforted them. "Don't be afraid. The Lord won't abandon his people. Just serve him with all your heart. And as for me, I will keep praying for you and teaching you the right way. But know this, if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away." Saul's reign continued, but the peace didn't last long. The Philistines returned with an overwhelming force, 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and soldiers as numerous as sand on the shore. The Israelites trembled. Many hid in caves, behind rocks, even in wells. Some fled across the Jordan. Saul was in Gilgal, waiting for Samuel to come and offer a sacrifice before battle. But the prophet was delayed. As the days passed, the troops began to scatter. Fear crept into Saul's heart. On the 7th day, still no Samuel. Saul, panicking, took matters into his own hands. He ordered the burnt offering and fellowship offering to be brought, and he, not Samuel, performed the ritual. No sooner had he finished than Samuel arrived. "What have you done?" Samuel asked, his face solemn. Saul tried to explain. "The men were deserting. You didn't come. The Philistines were gathering. I thought I needed to act." Samuel shook his head. "You acted foolishly. You disobeyed the Lord's command. If you had obeyed, your kingdom would have lasted forever. But now your dynasty will not endure. The Lord has sought a man after his own heart." And with that, Samuel left. The shadow of disobedience began to fall over Saul's reign. But the danger was far from over. Amid the rising tension, Saul's son, Jonathan, shined like a beacon of bravery. While Saul sat under a pomegranate tree with 600 soldiers, Jonathan whispered to his young armor-bearer, "Let's go to that Philistine outpost. Maybe the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can stop him, whether by many or by few." The armor-bearer nodded. "Do all that's in your heart. I'm with you." The two of them climbed a steep pass, hands and feet scrambling on the rocks. When they reached the top, Jonathan struck first. His armor-bearer followed. In moments, 20 Philistines were dead. Panic spread through the camp. Even the ground quaked. Back in the Israelite camp, Saul's watchman saw the confusion. He rallied his troops, including Israelites who had been hiding or even defected. A great victory followed. But Saul again made a rash decision. In the middle of the battle, he declared a vow, "Cursed be any man who eats before evening, until I have avenged my enemies." The soldiers fought through the day, exhausted and hungry. Jonathan, unaware of the vow, found some honey in the forest and ate. His energy returned immediately. Later, Saul sought the Lord's guidance through the priest, but received no answer. Suspecting sin in the camp, he cast lots to find the guilty. The lot fell on Jonathan. When Saul confronted him, Jonathan didn't flinch. "I tasted honey. Here I am, I must die." But the people protested. Shall Jonathan die after winning this great victory? Never. They rescued Jonathan from his father's hand. As time passed, God gave Saul another command, one that would test his obedience again. Through Samuel, God said, "Go and completely destroy the Amalekites' men, women, children, animals. Leave nothing alive. This is my judgment on their evil." Saul led his army to victory, but instead of obeying fully, he spared King Agag and kept the best sheep, cattle, and goods. When Samuel arrived, Saul greeted him proudly. "Bless you. I have carried out the Lord's command." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Then what is this bleating of sheep and lowing of cattle I hear?" Saul hesitated. The soldiers spared the best to sacrifice to the Lord. Samuel stepped closer. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings as much as obedience? To obey is better than sacrifice. Because you rejected his word, he has rejected you as king." As Samuel turned to leave, Saul grabbed his robe and it tore. Samuel looked back. "The Lord has torn the kingdom from you today and given it to a better man." Then he turned and executed Agag himself, completing the command Saul had refused to finish. From that day, Samuel never saw Saul again. He returned home, grieving. And the Lord, too, regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. In the silence that followed, a question hung in the air. Who would be the man after God's own heart? Chapter 5. David is anointed and enters the king's court. Samuel returned to his home in Ramah with a heavy heart. Though Saul still sat on the throne of Israel, the Lord had rejected him. The weight of that truth pressed down on Samuel's spirit. He had wept, mourned, and prayed, but the Lord said to him, "How long will you grieve for Saul? I have rejected him as king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." Samuel hesitated. "Lord, if Saul hears about this, he'll kill me." But God gave him a plan. "Take a young cow with you and say, 'I've come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I'll show you what to do. You must anoint the one I choose." So Samuel traveled to Bethlehem. When the elders saw him approaching, they trembled. "Do you come in peace?" they asked. "I come in peace," Samuel replied. "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me." He invited Jesse and his sons, and they gathered together. When Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, stepped forward, Samuel was immediately impressed. Tall, strong, commanding, he looked every bit like a king. Surely, Samuel thought, this is the Lord's anointed. But God whispered to him, "Do not consider his appearance or his height. I have rejected him." People look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, Jesse's sons passed before Samuel, Abinadab, Shammah, and for more. And one by one, God said, "Not him." Samuel turned to Jesse. "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse replied, "There is still the youngest. He's out tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We won't sit down until he arrives." So they sent for him. When the boy entered, he was ruddy, with bright eyes and a heart full of life. This was David, the youngest son, the forgotten shepherd boy. The Lord spoke to Samuel, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." Samuel took the horn of oil and poured it on David's head in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. But while David was being filled with the Spirit, Saul, still king, was experiencing something far different. The Spirit of the Lord had left him, and in its place, a tormenting spirit haunted him. Restless, anxious, and erratic, Saul began to unravel. His attendants noticed the change and said, "Let us find someone who plays the harp. When the evil spirit torments you, his music will soothe you." One of the servants spoke up, "I've seen a son of Jesse who plays skillfully. He's brave, articulate, and the Lord is with him." Saul sent messengers to Jesse, saying, "Send me your son David." And so the shepherd boy was called to the king's court. David arrived with gifts, bread, wine, and a young goat. He bowed before the king. Saul took a liking to him and made him his armor-bearer. And whenever the evil spirit tormented Saul, David would play his harp. The music calmed the king's heart. Peace would return, if only for a while. Though still a boy, David's life had changed forever. The oil of anointing was still fresh on his head, but the throne was still occupied. He was not yet a king, not yet a warrior, but he was now inside the palace, watching the very kingdom God had promised would one day be his. Then came the moment that would change everything, not just for David, but for all of Israel. The Philistines had gathered again to challenge Israel. Their army camped on one hill, the Israelites on another, with a valley in between. Every morning and evening for 40 days, a giant stepped forward to issue a challenge. His name was Goliath, a warrior from Gath, over 9 feet tall. He wore bronze armor that weighed more than 100 pounds. His spear was like a weaver's beam, and the iron tip alone weighed 15 pounds. He roared across the valley, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man to come fight me. If he kills me, we'll be your slaves. But if I kill him, you'll be ours." No one in Saul's army dared to step forward. Back in Bethlehem, Jesse sent David to deliver food to his older brothers, who were with the army. When David arrived at the camp, he heard Goliath's taunts. He saw the fear in the soldiers' eyes. He watched them shrink back, day after day, paralyzed. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? David asked that he should defy the armies of the living God. His older brother Eliab rebuked him. "Why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep? I know your arrogance. You just want to see the battle." David replied, "What have I done now? Can't I even ask a question?" But word of David's boldness spread quickly and reached the ears of Saul. The king summoned him. David stood before Saul and said, "Don't let anyone lose heart because of this Philistine. I will go and fight him." Saul looked at the young man and said, "You're just a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth." David replied, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear while protecting his father's sheep. The Lord who rescued me then will rescue me now." Reluctantly, Saul agreed and offered David his armor, but it was too heavy, too unfamiliar. David took it off. Instead, he chose 5 smooth stones from a stream, placed them in his shepherd's bag, took his sling in hand, and stepped out onto the battlefield. The king of Israel had lost his courage, but the future king had not. Hapter. Chapter 6, David and Goliath. A shepherd faces a giant. The battlefield was silent as David stepped forward alone. No armor. No sword. Just a sling in his hand and 5 smooth stones tucked in a leather pouch. Across the valley stood Goliath, the Philistine giant, bellowing threats, his armor clanking like thunder with every move. He was a man bred for war, towering above the tallest soldiers of Israel, and now staring down at a teenager with the audacity to challenge him. Goliath laughed, a deep, cruel sound that echoed over the hills. "Am I a dog," he sneered, "that you come at me with sticks?" He cursed David by his gods, his voice full of rage and mockery. "Come here, boy," he growled, "and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." But David didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He took another step forward, eyes locked on the giant. His voice, young but fierce, rang across the valley. "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin," David declared, "but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today, the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. Everyone gathered here will see that the Lord saves not by sword or spear, for the battle belongs to the Lord, and he will give you into our hands." Before Goliath could respond, David ran toward the battle line. With practiced ease, he reached into his pouch, pulled out a stone, placed it in his sling, and swung it with speed and precision. The stone soared across the valley and struck Goliath square in the forehead. Time seemed to stop. The giant swayed and then crashed face first into the ground. Silence fell across both camps. Then a roar erupted, not from the Philistines, but from the Israelites. David rushed forward, drew Goliath's own sword, and finished the battle, cutting off the giant's head. He lifted it high for all to see. The once mighty champion of the Philistines now lay lifeless, defeated not by a warrior, but by a shepherd boy filled with the Spirit of God. Terror seized the Philistine army. They turned and ran. The Israelites surged forward, pursuing them all the way to the gates of Ekron. It was one of the greatest victories Israel had ever seen, and it began with a sling, a stone, and a boy who believed God was greater than any giant. David returned to the Israelite camp a hero. He was brought before King Saul, still holding Goliath's severed head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked. David replied, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, from Bethlehem." From that day forward, everything changed. David was no longer just a shepherd. He became a warrior, a commander, and eventually Saul's greatest threat. But in the beginning, Saul was captivated. He brought David into his household, and the boy quickly rose in favor. He led troops into battle and returned victorious time and again. The people sang songs in his honor, chanting in the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." What began as admiration quickly turned into resentment. Saul couldn't sleep. The song haunted him. The more the people loved David, the more Saul feared him. "What more can he take?" Saul muttered bitterly. But the kingdom itself, though David had done nothing but serve faithfully, Saul began to watch him with suspicion. One day, while David was playing the harp to soothe the king, Saul's jealousy reached its peak. He hurled a spear at David, missing him by inches. David fled. From that moment on, David knew he was no longer safe. But not everyone in the palace had turned against him. Jonathan, Saul's son and heir to the throne, had become David's closest friend. Their bond was deeper than blood. When Jonathan learned of his father's desire to kill David, he warned him, risked everything to protect him, and made a sacred covenant between them. "May the Lord be witness between you and me, and between your descendants and mine, forever." David's fame only grew, and Saul's paranoia deepened. Hoping to trap him, Saul offered his daughter Michal to David in marriage on one condition: David must bring him the For skins of 100 Philistines, Saul thought David would surely die trying. But David didn't just fulfill the task, he doubled it. He returned with 200. Michal became his wife, and David's legend continued to grow. Saul's hatred turned to obsession. He ordered his men to watch David's house and kill him at dawn. But Michal helped David escape through a window, placing an idol in his bed to fool the guards. David fled to the prophet Samuel for refuge. When Saul sent soldiers to capture him, the Spirit of God overwhelmed them, and they began prophesying. Saul sent more, same result. Finally, Saul went himself, and he began prophesying uncontrollably, stripped of dignity and power. But even divine intervention didn't stop Saul. His heart was hardened. David was now a fugitive, running not because of guilt, but because of righteousness. He had done nothing wrong, yet he lived in hiding. From forests to caves, deserts to enemy territory, David wandered with a small band of loyal men. He wasn't just fleeing a king, he was being shaped into one. Though pursued like an outlaw, David refused to raise his hand against Saul. Even when the opportunity rose, he held back. Once, while hiding in a cave, Saul entered to relieve himself. David crept up quietly and cut a corner off Saul's robe. Later, he stood at a distance and called out, "My lord the king, see, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Why do you listen to those who say I want to harm you?" Saul was moved to tears. "You are more righteous than I," he admitted. "May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me." But David knew Saul's heart was unpredictable. He continued living in exile, hunted, but never broken. He was no longer just a boy with a sling. He was a man with a calling and a kingdom waiting. Chapter 7. David in exile and Saul's relentless pursuit. David lived as a fugitive, constantly on the run, but he was never alone. Slowly, a band of men gathered around him, those in debt, the outcasts, the broken-hearted. They came not because of riches or power, but because they believed in him. David became their leader, not as a tyrant or ruler, but as a man of honor and courage. They wandered from town to wilderness, from mountain caves to fortified strongholds. Yet even as Saul's armies hunted them, David never lifted a hand against the king who wanted him dead. Not once. The tension between David's loyalty and Saul's madness grew more intense each day. At one point, David received word that the Philistines were attacking the town of Keilah. Though he was still in hiding, David sought the Lord's counsel. Should I go and fight them? The answer was clear. Go. I will give you victory. David's men hesitated. We're fugitives already. If we go to battle, Saul will surely find us. But David asked the Lord again, and the answer remained the same. So they went, they fought, and they won. The people of Keilah were saved. But no good deed goes unpunished. Saul soon heard that David was in Keilah city with gates and bars, easy to trap someone inside. God has delivered him into my hands, Saul proclaimed. David, hearing of Saul's approach, prayed again, Lord, will the people of Keilah hand me over? The Lord answered, yes, they will. So David and his 600 men slipped away before Saul arrived. They moved again, deeper into the wilderness of Ziph. Saul chased him there, too, with 3,000 elite troops. But God did not allow Saul to capture him. In a moment of despair, David was surprised by a visit from Jonathan. His best friend had found him, even in hiding. Jonathan encouraged him, saying, don't be afraid. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. My father Saul knows this. There, in the wild, the two renewed their covenant of friendship. But their time was short. It was the last time they would ever see each other. David moved again to the desert of Maon. There, Saul nearly captured him. David was on one side of the mountain, Saul on the other, closing in. But just as the trap was about to spring, a messenger arrived. The Philistines are attacking. Saul turned back to deal with the new threat, and David escaped. He named that place the Rock of Escape. Later, David and his men hid in the wilderness of En-Gedi, a rugged area with caves overlooking the Dead Sea. Saul, after dealing with the Philistines, resumed the hunt. As fate would have it, Saul entered a cave to rest, not knowing that David and his men were hiding deeper inside that very cave. David's men saw the moment as divine. This is it, they whispered. God has delivered your enemy into your hands." David crept forward in silence, knife in hand. But instead of killing Saul, he only cut off a corner of his robe. Even that small act weighed heavy on his heart. When Saul left the cave, David followed at a safe distance and called out, "My lord the king." Startled, Saul turned. David bowed low. "Why do you believe I seek to harm you? Today, the Lord gave you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Look, here is the corner of your robe." Saul was stunned. Tears welled in his eyes. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, while I have treated you with evil. Now I know for sure you will be king. Swear to me that when you do, you will not wipe out my family." David swore. And Saul went home, but David did not. He remained in hiding. He had learned that Saul's remorse did not last long. Some time later, David and his men moved to the wilderness of Barren. There they came across the flocks of a wealthy but harsh man named Nabal. David's men had protected Nabal's shepherds, never taking a thing, always offering safety. When sheep shearing season came, a time of feasting and generosity, David sent messengers to kindly request provisions. Default text: She loaded donkeys with food, bread, wine, roasted grain, raisins, and fig cakes, and rode out to meet David before he reached their estate. Falling at his feet, Abigail said, "My lord, please let me speak. My husband is a fool, as his name says, but I didn't know your men had come. Please accept these gifts. Don't let this be a blemish on your record. The Lord will make you a lasting dynasty because you fight his battles, and when he gives you the throne, you'll be glad you didn't shed innocent blood today." David listened and relented. "Praise the Lord for sending you today," he said. "You've kept me from doing something rash. Go home in peace." Abigail returned to find Nabal drunk from a feast. The next morning, she told him everything. His heart failed him, he became like stone. 10 days later, the Lord struck him, and he died. When David heard, he sent for Abigail and made her his wife. But peace did not last. Saul returned once more to hunt David, again with 3,000 men. One night, David crept into Saul's camp with a trusted warrior, Abishai. They found Saul asleep, his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. "Let me strike him," Abishai whispered. "One blow is all I need." But David held him back. "No, who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" Instead, David took the spear and Saul's water jug. From a hilltop, he called out, "Abner, aren't you supposed to guard your king? Someone came into your camp to kill him. Look, I have his spear and jug." Saul recognized David's voice. Again, David said, "Why are you chasing me? What have I done?" Saul wept again. "I have sinned. Come back, David. I won't harm you." But David knew better. He returned the spear from a distance and vanished into the wilderness once more. He knew that Saul would never stop until one of them was gone. And so, David made a desperate choice. He would leave Israel entirely and seek refuge in the land of the Philistines. It was a dangerous move, but for a man with no peace, no home, and no safety, it was the only path left. Chapter 8: Exile in Philistine territory and the fall of King Saul. David had reached a breaking point. No matter where he went in Israel, Saul would find him. The king's wrath burned with no reason, and no promise Saul ever made was kept. So David made a decision that shocked many. He crossed into the land of Israel's sworn enemies, the Philistines. He and his 600 men, along with their families, journeyed to Gath, where he sought refuge with King Achish. David had once killed the Philistine champion Goliath, and yet now he stood before their king, asking for asylum. Achish accepted him, believing David had finally broken ties with his homeland. "He's made himself utterly detestable to Israel," Achish thought. "He will be my servant forever." David requested a place to live apart from the capital. Achish granted him the town of Ziklag, and it became David's home for a year and for months. But David's loyalty wasn't as it appeared. While he lived under Achish's protection, David launched secret raids against Israel's enemies, the Geshurites, the Girzites, the Amalekites. He left no survivors, ensuring that no word of his true actions would reach the Philistine court. When Achish asked where he had raided, David would simply say, "Against the Negev of Judah," leading the king to believe he was attacking his own people. Impressed by David's apparent betrayal of Israel, Achish planned to bring him to battle against Israel itself. He told David, "You must come with me, and I will make you my bodyguard for life." David, ever careful, replied, "You'll see what your servant can do." Meanwhile, far to the north, King Saul was unraveling. The Philistines gathered their armies for war. As Saul saw their forces spread across the land, terror gripped him. He sought the Lord's guidance, but the heavens were silent. No dream came. No prophet spoke. The sacred Urim stones yielded nothing. In desperation, Saul turned to what he had once condemned. He disguised himself and went at night to a medium and Endor, a woman who communicated with the dead. He had once outlawed such practices, but now, panicked and alone, he betrayed his own laws. "Call up for me the spirit of Samuel," he said. The woman, fearful, hesitated, but Saul swore no harm would come to her. Then something unexpected happened. The spirit of Samuel truly appeared. The woman screamed, "You're Saul. What do you see?" Saul asked. "A god rising from the earth," she whispered. "An old man in a robe." Saul fell to the ground and bowed. Samuel's voice came, weary and stern. "Why have you disturbed me?" Saul cried. "The Philistines are coming. God has turned away from me. I don't know what to do." Samuel's spirit replied, "The Lord has departed from you. He has given the kingdom to David because you did not obey his command. Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." The message was clear. Saul would die. Devastated, Saul collapsed, weak with fear. The medium and his servants begged him to eat, and after much pleading, he relented. He ate, then returned to camp, knowing his end was near. As the Philistine army prepared to strike, David was preparing too, but not for battle against his people. The Philistine commanders grew suspicious. "Isn't this David, the one they sing about? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. He'll turn on us in battle." Despite Achish's protests, the commanders refused to allow David to fight. Reluctantly, Achish sent David back to Ziklag. David was likely relieved, but what he returned to was devastation. While he and his men had been away, the Amalekites had raided Ziklag. They burned the city to the ground and took everyone, wives, children, everything captive. When David and his men saw the ruins, they wept until they had no strength left. His own men turned against him, speaking of stoning him. But David didn't crumble. He strengthened himself in the Lord. He asked the priest for the ephod and inquired of God, "Shall the first pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" The Lord answered, "Pursue them. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David and his 600 men set out, but 200, exhausted, stayed behind. The remaining 400 pressed on. Along the way, they found an abandoned Egyptian servant, a slave of the Amalekites. He had been left to die when he fell ill. They gave him food and water, and he told them where the Amalekites were camped. David launched a surprise attack at dawn. For a full day and into the night, they struck down the Amalekites. Not one captive was harmed. David rescued every wife, every child, every possession. Nothing was lost. He returned victorious. Some of the men didn't want to share the spoils with the 200 who had stayed behind. But David refused. They stayed with the supplies. Their share will be the same as ours. All will share alike. This act of generosity and justice bound his men to him more deeply than ever. Meanwhile, far to the north, Saul's final battle began. On the slopes of Mount Gilboa, the Philistines attacked with full force. Saul's sons, including Jonathan, were slain. The heart of Israel's army was broken. As arrows struck him, Saul realized he was mortally wounded. He turned to his armor-bearer and begged, "Draw your sword and kill me. I don't want the Philistines to torture me." But the armor-bearer was too afraid. So Saul fell on his own sword. When the armor-bearer saw him dead, he did the same. The next day, the Philistines found Saul's body. They cut off his head, stripped his armor, and displayed it in the temple of their gods. His corpse was hung on the walls of Bethshan in disgrace. But men from Jabesh Gilead, remembering how Saul had once saved them, risked their lives to retrieve his body. They took him down, burned his remains, and buried his bones with honor under a tamarisk tree. Thus ended the reign of Israel's first king. He had started with humility but finished in despair. Yet even in death, he was remembered by some for the good he once did. And somewhere far from the battlefield, a shepherd king in exile mourned not for a throne, but for a fallen friend. Chapter 9. David becomes king of Israel and unites the nation. The news reached David in Ziklag on the third day. A man arrived from Saul's battlefield, his clothes torn, dust on his head a sign of grief. He fell before David, trembling. "Where have you come from?" David asked. "From the battle," the man replied. "I have escaped from Mount Gilboa." David's heart sank. "Tell me what happened." The man said, "Israel fled. Many have died. Saul and Jonathan are dead." David pressed him for proof. The man explained he had come upon Saul wounded, leaning on his spear, still alive but barely. Saul had begged him to deliver a final mercy blow to avoid being captured alive by the Philistines. The man, an Amalekite, claimed to have done it. Then he brought Saul's crown and armband and laid them at David's feet. David tore his clothes, and all his men did the same. They fasted and wept the entire day for Saul, for Jonathan, and for the army of Israel. When the sun sank low, David called the young Amalekite forward again. "How are you not afraid?" he asked. "To raise your hand against the Lord's anointed." And with that, he ordered one of his soldiers, "Strike him down." The man fell. David mourned deeply not only for the fall of a king, but for the death of his closest friend. He composed a lament, known as the Song of the Bow, a haunting tribute to Saul and Jonathan. He sang, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Jonathan lies dead on your high places. I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan. Your love for me was wonderful, more than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen." The nation was shattered, but David knew the time had come. He prayed to the Lord, asking, "Shall I go up to the cities of Judah?" The Lord answered, "Go up." "To which one?" David asked. "To Hebron," came the reply. So David, his wives, and all his men moved to Hebron. There the men of Judah anointed him king over their tribe. But the kingdom was not yet united. Saul's military commander, Abner, placed Saul's remaining son, Ishbosheth, on the throne over the rest of Israel. A civil war broke out, David ruling in the south from Hebron, Ishbosheth in the north from Mahanaim. For 7.5 years, the nation was divided. Still, David grew stronger, and the house of Saul weaker. Then came a turning point. One day, Ishbosheth accused Abner of betrayal over a dispute involving a concubine. Offended and furious, Abner turned his back on Saul's son and sent messengers to David. "Make a covenant with me, and I will bring all Israel over to you." David agreed, with one request: his first wife, Michal, daughter of Saul, be returned to him. She had been taken and given to another man during Saul's reign. David wanted her back not only for love, but for legitimacy. She was returned. Abner traveled to Hebron and met with David, pledging loyalty and promising to rally Israel under one king. David received him warmly and sent him off in peace, but not everyone trusted Abner. Joab, David's military commander, returned and heard the news. He was enraged. Abner had killed Joab's brother in battle years earlier. Driven by vengeance, Joab lured Abner back to Hebron and murdered him in cold blood. David was horrified. He declared his innocence before the Lord and ordered a national mourning for Abner. He walked behind the casket himself, weeping at the grave. "A commander and a great man has fallen in Israel today," he said. The people saw his heart and knew he had not condoned the killing. Soon after, two captains from Ishbosheth's army seeking favor with David betrayed their own king. They crept into his house during his midday rest and murdered him in his bed, bringing his head to David. But David was not impressed. "You think I'll reward murderers," he said. "You killed an innocent man in his own home." He ordered their execution on the spot and gave Ishbosheth a proper burial. At last, the tribes of Israel gathered before David in Hebron. "We are your own flesh and blood," they said. "Even while Saul was king, it was you who led Israel in and out. The Lord said to you, 'You shall shepherd my people Israel and become their ruler.'" They anointed David as king over all Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king. He would reign 40 years 7.5 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. His first act as king of the United Kingdom was to capture Jerusalem, which was still in the hands of the Jebusites. They mocked him from their fortress walls. Even the blind and lame could keep you out. But David was undeterred. He led his men through a hidden water shaft and conquered the city. He established his throne there, calling it the City of David. He built strongholds, homes, and fortified its walls, and the Lord was with him. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent cedar logs, stonemasons, and carpenters to build David a palace. David saw the Lord's hand in it all and knew he had been established as king for the sake of God's people, not for his own glory. Then David turned his attention to the most sacred object in all of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant. For years it had remained in the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim. David wanted it brought to Jerusalem, where it belonged at the center of Israel's worship and identity. He gathered 30,000 men for the occasion. They placed the ark on a new cart and began the joyous procession. Musicians played lyres and harps, tambourines and cymbals. The people sang and danced before the Lord. But something went wrong. As the oxen stumbled, a man named Uzzah reached out to steady the ark. The moment his hand touched it, God's wrath broke out, and Uzzah fell dead. The celebration halted. David was stunned and afraid. "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" he asked. So he left it in the home of Obed-Edom, a Levite. 3 months passed, and news came. The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom because of the ark. Encouraged, David tried again, but this time with reverence. The ark was carried by priests, as God had commanded. Every 6 steps, sacrifices were offered. David, wearing a simple priestly garment, danced with abandon before the Lord. The people shouted. Trumpets blared. When the ark reached Jerusalem, it was placed inside a tent David had prepared. But not everyone rejoiced. From a window, Michal, David's wife and Saul's daughter, watched him leaping and whirling in the streets. She despised him for what she saw as undignified behavior. When David returned to bless his household, she confronted him. "How the king of Israel honored himself today," she said, exposing himself like a common fool in front of slave girls. David replied, "I danced before the Lord, who chose me instead of your father. I will become even more undignified if it means honoring him." From that day on, Michal bore no children. David had united the kingdom. The ark had come home, and Jerusalem, the once foreign stronghold, was now the beating heart of Israel. But David knew the true foundation of his reign was not a throne or a crown, but the Lord himself. Chapter 10, the legacy of David, triumphs, tragedies, and the promise to come. With Jerusalem as his capital, David reigned over a united Israel. The city thrived. Peace and prosperity began to take root, and the once divided tribes were now one nation under a single shepherd king. David wasn't perfect, he knew that, but he longed to honor God with his rule. And more than anything, he wanted to build God a permanent home. One day, David said to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." Nathan agreed. "Do whatever is in your heart. The Lord is with you." But that night, God spoke a different word to Nathan. "Tell David, are you the one to build me a house? I've never lived in one. I've always moved with my people. I took you from tending sheep and made you ruler over my people. I have been with you wherever you went. I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. You will not build me a house, but I will build you a house. Your line will endure forever. Your throne will never end." When Nathan told David this promise, David was overwhelmed. He went and sat before the Lord, humbled to his core. "Who am I, sovereign Lord?" David prayed. "And what is my family, that you have brought me this far? You are great, O Lord. There is no one like you." With God's blessing, David expanded Israel's borders. He defeated the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, and others who threatened peace. He brought justice to the land and appointed wise leaders. Among them were Joab as commander of the army and Jehoshaphat as record keeper. The treasury overflowed with spoils of war, and David dedicated them all to the Lord. But even in triumph, David didn't forget kindness. He remembered his promise to his dear friend Jonathan. "Is there anyone left of Saul's family?" David asked one day, "to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" They brought him a servant named Ziba, who said, "Jonathan has a son Mephibosheth crippled in both feet." David summoned Mephibosheth, who arrived trembling, expecting punishment. But David smiled and said, "Don't be afraid. I will show you kindness for your father's sake. I will restore your family's land, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed low. "What is your servant, that you should notice a dead dog like me?" But David treated him as family, and Mephibosheth dined at the king's table like one of his own sons. Time passed, and war erupted again, this time with the Ammonites. David sent Joab to lead the army, but David stayed behind in Jerusalem. And it was there, in the quiet of comfort, that temptation crept in. One evening, from his rooftop, David saw a woman bathing. She was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. Desire took root where discipline should have stood. David summoned her. They lay together. Soon after, she sent word she was pregnant. David panicked. He tried to cover his sin by bringing Uriah home from battle, hoping he would sleep with his wife. But Uriah, loyal to his comrades in the field, refused to enjoy comforts while others fought. So David sent him back to war with a sealed letter, his own death sentence. "Place Uriah at the front lines," the letter read. "Then withdraw from him." Joab obeyed. Uriah was killed. Bathsheba mourned, and then David took her as his wife. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. God sent Nathan the prophet. He told David a story. There were two men in a city, one rich, one poor. The rich man had many sheep and cattle. The poor man had nothing but one little lamb he loved like a daughter. One day, the rich man took the poor man's lamb and served it to a guest. David burned with anger. "That man deserves to die." Nathan looked him in the eyes. "You are the man." David broke. "I have sinned against the Lord," he said. Nathan replied, "The Lord has forgiven you, you will not die. But the child born of this sin will." The baby became ill. David fasted, wept, and prayed night and day. But on the seventh day, the child died. David rose, washed, and worshipped. When asked why, he said, "While the child was alive, I fasted, hoping the Lord would be gracious. But now he is gone. I cannot bring him back." Later, Bathsheba bore another son, Solomon, and the Lord loved him. But David's troubles weren't over. His household began to unravel. His eldest son, Amnon, became obsessed with his half-sister, Tamar. He tricked her, lured her into his chamber, and violated her. David was furious but did nothing. Tamar's full brother, Absalom, took matters into his own hands. He waited 2 years, then arranged a feast. There, he ordered his servants to kill Amnon. Absalom fled and stayed in exile for 3 years. David mourned both sons, one dead, one estranged. Eventually, Joab convinced David to bring Absalom back. But for 2 years, David refused to see his face. When they finally reunited, there was no peace. Absalom began to steal the hearts of the people. He stood at the city gates, offering judgment to those who felt ignored. "If only I were judge," he would say, "you'd get justice." He gathered support quietly and then declared himself king in Hebron. David, caught off guard, fled Jerusalem barefoot, weeping. His loyal followers followed him into exile once more. Along the road, he faced betrayal, curses, and grief, but also faith. Absalom entered Jerusalem and took control. He followed the advice of David's former counselor Ahithophel until another advisor, secretly loyal to David, gave Absalom dangerous counsel. "Wait, gather more troops." That delay saved David. Eventually, the two armies met in the forest of Ephraim. The battle was fierce. 20,000 died. Absalom, riding a mule, got his hair caught in a tree. Suspended helplessly, he became an easy target. Though David had pleaded, "Be gentle with the boy," Joab struck him down. When David heard, he was inconsolable. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you." Joab rebuked him. "You shame the men who risked their lives for you. Go out and thank them, or you'll lose them all." David pulled himself together and returned to the city. Later in his reign, David made a critical mistake. He ordered a census of Israel's fighting men, motivated not by duty, but by pride. Joab warned him, "May the Lord multiply your troops 100-fold without the need for counting." But David insisted. When the count was finished, guilt overtook him. "I have sinned greatly," he confessed. The Lord gave him 3 options as punishment: 3 years of famine, 3 months fleeing from enemies, or 3 days of plague. David said, "Let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great." A plague swept through Israel. 70,000 died. As the angel approached Jerusalem, God relented. The plague stopped at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. David rushed there, built an altar, and offered sacrifices. The plague ceased. It was on that very site, Mount Moriah, that David's son Solomon would one day build the temple. As David's life neared its end, he looked back not only on victories and failures but on grace. Through triumph and tragedy, betrayal and forgiveness, God had never abandoned him. He passed the crown to Solomon with these words, "Be strong and show yourself a man. Walk in the ways of the Lord. Obey his commands, and if you do, you and your descendants will reign in peace." David closed his eyes, not just as a king but as a man after God's own heart, and the promise of his line would echo down through generations until it reached a manger in Bethlehem.